Hi everyone, I'm Jodi Daniels, founder and privacy consultant at Clover Advisors. And today we're going to talk about CCPA. You might be wondering, what is CCPA? It's the California Consumer Privacy Act, passed in 2018 and effective and enforceable in 2020. So let's dive on in. I think actually it's really important to understand how did we get to the development of CCPA. First, to kind of get started, I think it's important to understand that this groundbreaking law that was passed in 2018 and became effective in 2020 is really because more than 2/3 of Americans have said that they would like to have more done to protect their privacy. They believe that more regulation of advertisers is okay, that there aren't enough laws to protect people's privacy, and they really are not super confident with how social media is handling their data. So enter in CCPA. As I mentioned, it was passed in 2018, became effective in 2020. And if you fall within the scope of CCPA, then it's really important you understand and maintain compliance for this particular law. Not only because it's a law, but because our customers expect your company to protect their data. And if you don't, you will lose customers. This is true whether you're B2C or B2B. And this is the start of what is likely to be more states passing similar laws to CCPA. So what is CCPA? Well, it is the first comprehensive data privacy law of its kind to go into effect in the United States. And it is expected, and there's been many other state privacy laws that are being drafted and likely to pass on their own. Now, today there are other data privacy laws, but not quite like CCPA. Now, CCPA really covers for-profit companies, and you need to conduct business in the state of California. That does not mean you have to have a physical presence. You just have to actually be serving customers or have employees in California. So dive a little bit deeper into, does CCPA apply to you? Well, right now, if under CCPA, if your company has gross revenues of more than $25 million, or you essentially alone, in combination, somehow process, receive, buy, sell, share more than 50,000 personal data points on consumers, households, or devices. And it's important to know that, as we're going to learn, the online identifiers, all those cookies, tags, pixels, that could be personal information. So think about your website and how many visitors you have. You might easily get to that 50,000 threshold. Or the last criteria is you might derive more than 50% of your annual revenue from selling consumer personal information. You only need one of these to have to be in scope for CCPA. Now, if your organization has to comply with other privacy laws, such as HIPAA, if you're a healthcare organization, or GLBA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, if you're in financial services, then the data covered by those laws are excluded. But that likely does not mean that your entire organization is excluded, just the data under those laws. There's a couple other important points to understand when it comes to CCPA. There's this idea of a service provider, and that is the organization is providing services for another organization. You're using the data for the business purpose that someone hired you for. And if you have to comply with GDPR, this is kind of like a processor. You might internally call it a vendor. Then we have personal information. And the formal definition under CCPA is that all information that identifies, relates to, describes, is capable of being associated with, may reasonably be linked directly or indirectly with a particular consumer or household. So essentially, if you have data that could reasonably be connected to a consumer or a household, that's considered personal information. And very important is to understand the very interesting, nuanced definition of selling. Essentially, it is not only the idea that you have sold data for $1, for money. It could mean selling, renting, releasing, disclosing, disseminating, making available, or otherwise communicating orally, in writing, or by electronic or other means a consumer's personal information to another business or a third party for monetary, and here's the important piece, other valuable consideration. So sometimes you might share information with a third party and they give you something in exchange that is not just money. In that situation, the information could have been considered sold under CCPA. Now, what happens if you choose not to comply? Well, there's fines. If you don't protect the data as CCPA expects you to, you might be at a greater risk for a data breach. There's lawsuits and, of course, loss of trust and potential loss of sales. So what does happen if there's a fine or a data breach? Well, regulatory fines can range from $2,500 to $7,500 per violation. And if you suffer from a data breach where the data was unencrypted and non-redacted, there's the potential for a civil lawsuit up to $100 to $750 per record. So think about the opportunity for a class action lawsuit if there's a data breach that meets these requirements. That can be very costly. Preventative actions for securing the data is going to be very important. When we're talking about personal information or personal data, what are we talking about? It's name, contact information, things like age, gender, job title, company, birth date, financial, health information, and a long list of other traits, biometric information too, genetic information. And then when we talk about online identifiers, think of that ID number, IP address, cookie, geolocation information, all those different trackers and pixels and tags and other ways to track somebody online. Those online identifiers, previously considered anonymous and non-PII or non-personally identifiable, is now considered, in most cases, personal information. So under CCPA, individuals have a variety of different rights. A California resident could say, I want to know what information you have on me, the right to access. Or they might want to delete their information. They have a right to know what kind of information you're processing on them, hence the privacy notice. So it's important to know what data you have to be able to honor these personal individual rights. Now, another big right that California residents have is to opt out of the sale of personal information. If your organization sells information, then you must notify individuals, have a do not sell my personal information link on your homepage, also require a telephone number and another form for the individual to opt out of the sale of data. If your organization happens to be processing children's data, it's important that you know that to actually sell children's data, you have to have consent. Children under the age of 13, it requires a parent. Children between 13 and 16 can get the consent directly from the child. There's a few exceptions to the sale of data. If you're a service provider, if the individual said it's okay, send that data to that third party, or there's sort of some other situations where the consumer uses the services intentionally to interact with other partners, that is excluded. But essentially, if you are sharing data with a third party, the third party uses the information for other purposes, it is likely considered a sale of data. Let's also talk about financial incentives. Do you have a loyalty program? Do you offer a discount to individuals or customers to sign up? Well, under CCPA, there's a specific call out regarding financial incentives, and they define it as a program, benefit, or other offering, including payments to consumers related to the collection, retention, or sale of personal information. And this can have impacts to your loyalty programs. So it's really important to understand what type of data you have and what type of financial incentives you might offer. In doing so, you'll want to value, well, how much is that worth to the individual? You'll want to have a notice provided to the individual of the type of financial incentives you offer, and be sure that if the individual says, I don't want to participate in that there's no discriminatory practices for those who choose not to participate. In summary, one of the very first steps to comply with CCPA is to understand the flow of data in your organization. So what data do you have? How do you use it? Where is it stored? Who do you share it with? When you begin to answer those questions, you'll be on the right path to complying with CCPA. It's also important to know that your business has changed. So if you've started this process, you'll need to come back through at least once a year to make sure that you're continuing to always have a current view of your business and the data that you process. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at redcloveradvisors.com or send us a note at info@redcloveradvisors.com. Thanks so much.